Hi everyone. This is a little reading from my book about writing, The Reason to Write. It's called The Teaching People. Over the years, I've written and published a great deal about my childhood. In adolescence, I tended to believe my early years were a jumbled mishmash of happenstance that made no sense at all, a span of years unlikely to be any use in later life. But as I've zigzagged through adulthood, I found myself drawing long and hard on the events and the encounters with what I call teaching people. Observing them with hindsight, I've come to appreciate how certain people were positioned like clues on a kind of treasure trail. The realm of teaching people is like one of those expensive Christmas advent calendars containing chocolates all wrapped up in foil. But unlike the calendars, none of the windows are labelled. From the time I could walk, I was encouraged to learn from teaching people, the droves of miraculous oddballs I'd met in the flesh, and those presented at arm's length in stories and in books. As time has passed, and as I've made use of teaching people, I've learnt to see it all from the far end of the tunnel. Some teaching people passed on one or two choice fragments of information, while others provided a kind of kaleidoscope of wonder. Most of them fell somewhere in between. A few of the teaching people I encountered as a child, the ones I value most greatly, are like a ball of brightly coloured ribbon in a box. The more I tug at the end, the more ribbon comes out for me to use. My favourite teaching people are all kept together in my head. They're different colour ribbons in the same box, the ends poking out. Over the years, I got to know them very well indeed, from things they said to me, things they wrote, or a mixture of both. As with anything that boasts a timeline of its own, a relationship with teaching people is as much about you as a pupil as it is about them. By that, I mean you have a kind of responsibility to knead the material amassed in a particular mental file, as though it were a dough of some kind. It's for you to draw out the information useful to your situation and circumstances, break off a chunk and shape it. Some of the information I received from teaching people was in the form of general life lessons. Other bits and pieces were fragments of insight and detail, yet more was specifically targeted to the business of writing and publishing. Altogether, the know-how formed a matrix. The matrix I have come to live by and work by. I sprinkle life lessons here and there as they bubble up, using them as and when they're needed. For now, here's a taste of something which just flashed into my mind. One Saturday night, 40 years ago, an Australian family arrived at our home at Langton House. There were the mother and the father and 3 small children, each one of them a younger version of the last, like Russian Matryoshka dolls. Deeply affected by my father's work and desperate to meet him, they had come overland from Australia. An adventure that had taken the family 3 years. 5 years after the dark autumn night of their arrival, the father of the family, whose name was Rob, was giving me a ride up to London in his quite old van. He described the journey from down under, up through Indonesia, westwards to India, across Central Asia, Turkey and Europe. When he was finished, I asked him what he'd learned on the trip. By the time the question was posed, we were zigzagging through the labyrinth of South London suburbs. Rob jammed his foot down on the brakes, and the battered old van jolted and shuddered to an uncomfortable stop. Turning to me, he paused for what seemed like an eternity. Then Well, I wondered if he'd actually gone mad. He said, never, ever, ever listen to anyone who holds you back, he said. That's from The Reason to Write.